Imagine standing in the suffocating heat of a Nazi concentration camp. You are weak from hunger, beaten by guards, and surrounded by death on every side. Suddenly, an escape attempt triggers a brutal punishment. 10 men must die by starvation, chosen at random. One prisoner cries out in despair, "My wife! My children!" The guards drag him forward, sealing his fate. But then, something unimaginable happens. A frail Catholic priest, dressed in the striped uniform of a prisoner, steps forward and speaks calmly. "Take me instead. I am a priest. I have no family. Let me die in his place." The guards are stunned. The condemned prisoner is speechless. And in that moment, the lives of everyone present are forever changed. This is the story of Maximilian Kolbe, a Franciscan friar from Poland, whose act of ultimate sacrifice in 1941 made him one of the most extraordinary witnesses of faith in the 20th century. Kolbe's life was not only about his heroic death. From his childhood visions of the Virgin Mary, to his groundbreaking work in media and missionary outreach, to his final days in the hell of Auschwitz, every chapter of his journey reveals a man consumed with love for God, for Our Lady, and for souls. Today, Maximilian Kolbe is remembered as the Martyr of Charity, the saint who proved that even in humanity's darkest hour, the light of Christ shines brightest through love. But before the world knew him as a hero of Auschwitz, Maximilian was simply a sickly boy in Poland who once had a vision that would define his entire destiny. Maximilian Kolbe was born Rajmund Kolbe on January 8, 1894, in the small Polish town of Zdunska Wola. His parents, Julius and Maria Kolbe, were devout Catholics who worked hard as weavers to provide for their family. They raised their children with a deep love for God and the Blessed Virgin Mary, planting seeds of faith that would bear extraordinary fruit in their son. From an early age, Rajmund was different. He was bright, imaginative, and intensely spiritual. But he was also mischievous, quick-tempered, and restless. His mother often worried about his strong will. One day, exasperated, she asked him, "What will become of you, my son?" The boy was struck by her words. That night, he went to pray before a statue of the Virgin Mary, and something extraordinary happened. Later, he would recount a vision that forever changed his life. The Virgin Mary appeared to him holding 2 crowns, one white, symbolizing purity, and one red, symbolizing martyrdom. She asked him which he would choose. Young Rajmund replied, "I choose both." From that moment, his life was marked by a burning desire for holiness and sacrifice. The world around him, however, was far from peaceful. Poland at the time was under foreign occupation, divided between Russia, Germany, and Austria. National identity and Catholic faith were often under attack. Growing up in this climate, Rajmund developed not only a love for the church, but also a fierce dedication to defending the faith against hostility. At the age of 13, he and his older brother Francis entered the Franciscan seminary in Lwów. There, Rajmund took the name Maximilian, after the heroic Saint Maximilian of Tebessa. His brilliance quickly became evident. He excelled in studies, especially in mathematics and science. But his greatest passion was theology and Marian devotion. Even as a teenager, Maximilian dreamed big. He saw the spiritual battle between good and evil as a cosmic war, and he longed to fight under the banner of the Virgin Mary. His vision of the 2 crowns gave him a clear mission: to live in purity, to give his life in sacrifice, and to dedicate every breath to spreading devotion to Our Lady. Yet Maximilian was not without weakness. He was plagued by poor health, suffering from tuberculosis that would trouble him all his life. Doctors doubted he would live long, but his fragile body only deepened his conviction. Whatever time he had, he would give it entirely to God. The boy who had chosen both crowns was now on a path that would lead him first to Rome, then across the world, and ultimately into the heart of humanity's darkest hour. Maximilian's journey to sainthood was anything but easy. From the beginning of his religious formation, he faced both physical weakness and spiritual trials that tested his resolve. At the Franciscan seminary, young Maximilian excelled in intellect, but his body was frail. Tuberculosis gnawed at his lungs, causing chronic coughing, fatigue, and bouts of near collapse. At times, it seemed his life might be cut short before he could even begin his mission. Fellow friars often wondered how such a weak man could possibly endure the rigors of religious life. Yet Maximilian responded with determination. "I must become a saint," he would say, "and I must become a great saint." But Maximilian's struggles were not only with his health. Inside his soul, he wrestled with doubts, scruples, and the weight of the enormous mission he felt called to carry out. The vision of the two crowns haunted him. He had chosen both purity and martyrdom. Yet what did that mean in daily life? Could he live up to such a radical call? It was during these years that Maximilian developed a deep devotion to the Virgin Mary as the Immaculata. He saw her not only as a mother, but as a powerful warrior against evil. This devotion gave him strength when his body failed, and courage when his spirit trembled. He came to believe that through Mary's intercession, nothing was impossible, even for a sickly friar like himself. In 1917, while studying in Rome, Maximilian witnessed the growing hostility toward the Church. That year marked the 200th anniversary of Freemasonry, and anti-Catholic demonstrations filled the streets. Shocked by the open mockery of the Pope and the faith, Maximilian resolved to fight back, not with violence, but with prayer, truth, and media. He founded the Militia Immaculatae, or Army of the Immaculata, a movement dedicated to winning the world for Christ through devotion to Mary. Yet even as his vision expanded, tuberculosis continued to threaten his life. More than once, he coughed up blood and had to be hospitalized. Doctors told him to slow down, but Maximilian pressed on, convinced that his time might be short and that every day mattered. He returned to Poland after his ordination, determined to put his ideals into action. But here, too, struggles awaited. The resources were few, the opposition strong, and many doubted the value of his ambitious plans. Still, Maximilian refused to give in. He believed God had entrusted him with a mission larger than himself, and he was ready to risk everything to fulfill it. What emerged from these early trials was a man of unshakable resolve, a frail friar with the heart of a warrior, preparing to launch one of the boldest evangelizing missions of the 20th century. The defining moment of Maximilian Kolbe's vocation came not in a quiet chapel, but on the bustling streets of Rome. It was 1917, the same year that Our Lady was appearing to 3 shepherd children in Fatima, Portugal, calling for prayer, penance, and consecration to her Immaculate Heart. Maximilian was studying at the Pontifical Gregorian University when he witnessed a shocking event. On October 16th, Freemasons held a noisy, aggressive demonstration in St. Peter's Square. Banners depicted Satan crushing the Archangel Michael underfoot. Pamphlets mocked the Pope and Catholic teaching. Maximilian was horrified. To him, it was not just a protest, it was a declaration of war against the Church. That day, something crystallized in his soul. He realized that the battle he had always felt within himself, the struggle between darkness and light, was not just personal. It was global. Evil forces were working to destroy the faith, and he could not remain passive. He had to fight. But how? Maximilian was no soldier, no politician, no wealthy leader. He was a sickly friar, coughing up blood, barely able to climb a staircase without exhaustion. And yet, in his weakness, he found his answer. He would fight with Mary. That same evening, he gathered a small group of fellow seminarians in his cell. With fiery words and trembling hands, he laid out his vision. A spiritual army, consecrated entirely to the Immaculata, dedicated to prayer, sacrifice, and spreading the gospel through every means possible. They called it the Militia Immaculatae, the Army of the Immaculata. Their mission was simple but bold: to bring every soul to Christ through Mary. Each member consecrated themselves to the Immaculate Virgin, wore the miraculous medal, and committed to evangelize wherever they were. This encounter became the turning point of Maximilian's life. From that day, he was no longer just a friar pursuing holiness for himself. He became a commander in a spiritual battle, a strategist who would use modern tools, printing presses, magazines, radio, to spread faith on a global scale. After his ordination in 1918, Maximilian returned to Poland and set his vision in motion. Despite limited funds and constant illness, he launched a magazine called Night of the Immaculata. To everyone's surprise, it exploded in popularity. Within a decade, its circulation reached over 1 million copies a month, spreading Marian devotion and Catholic teaching across Europe. But Maximilian dreamed bigger. In 1927, he founded Niepokalanów, the city of the Immaculata, just outside Warsaw. It became one of the largest monasteries in the world, housing hundreds of friars dedicated to prayer and publishing. From here, Maximilian planned not only to flood Poland with the light of the gospel, but to send missionaries abroad. And indeed, in 1930, weak and sickly though he was, he traveled to Japan. Within months, he established a new friary and a printing press in Nagasaki, planting seeds of the faith that survive even today. All of this sprang from that single encounter in Rome, the moment when Maximilian realized that the Virgin Mary was calling him to fight, not with swords or guns, but with prayer, truth, and sacrificial love. And yet, as his mission expanded across continents, Maximilian could not foresee that the ultimate battleground awaiting him was not in publishing houses or missionary journeys, but in the heart of a Nazi concentration camp. Maximilian Kolbe's vision for the Militia Immaculatae quickly transformed into a powerful movement. His burning conviction was simple: if every soul consecrated themselves to the Immaculate Virgin, the world would be one for Christ. And he was determined to use every modern tool available to spread this message. The friary he founded in 1927, Niepokalanów, the city of the Immaculata, was unlike anything the church had ever seen. It was not just a monastery, but a spiritual army base. Hundreds of friars lived there in community, bound by prayer, work, and zeal for Mary's cause. Together, they operated one of the largest printing presses in Europe. From Niepokalanów flowed the magazine Night of the Immaculata, which, at its peak, reached more than 1 million copies per month. Its content was simple yet powerful: Marian devotion, catechesis, encouragement to live the faith boldly in an age of skepticism. Through these pages, Maximilian reached into homes, villages, and cities, igniting a renewed love for the Virgin Mary and for Christ. But his ambitions stretched far beyond Poland. In 1930, despite fragile health, Maximilian embarked on a missionary journey to Japan. With nothing but faith and determination, he established a friary in Nagasaki and launched a Japanese edition of his magazine. Remarkably, when the atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki in 1945, the friary stood nearly untouched, an astonishing survival many attributed to Mary's protection. Back in Poland, Niepokalanów continued to flourish. At one point, it became the largest monastery in the world, housing over 700 friars dedicated to prayer and apostolic work. The friars lived in simplicity, often sleeping in unheated rooms, eating meager meals, and working long hours. Yet they were joyful, inspired by Maximilian's passionate leadership. Maximilian himself was tireless. Tuberculosis continued to plague him, draining his strength and forcing him into frequent hospitalizations. Still, he refused to slow down. Every ounce of energy was poured into his mission. He believed that modern media, printing, radio, even film, were gifts from God that must be used to spread the gospel. But perhaps Maximilian's greatest service was not his publishing empire or his missionary travels. It was his fatherly care for the friars under him. Witnesses recall how he would encourage the young brothers, listening patiently to their struggles and always pointing them to Mary. His motto was simple: don't ever be afraid to love the Immaculata too much. You can never love her more than Jesus did. Yet, as Europe plunged into darkness in the late 1930s, Maximilian's mission faced its greatest test. In 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The presses of Niepokalanów, once filled with Marian devotion, now began to print pamphlets calling people to resist hatred and to cling to faith. The friary opened its doors to thousands of refugees, Catholics, Jews, even members of other faiths, seeking safety. Maximilian had prepared his whole life for this moment. All his visions, sacrifices, and missions pointed to one reality. He was ready to give everything, even his life, for the love of Christ and the salvation of souls. The stage was set for his greatest act of service, not at a printing press or in a friary, but in the barbed wire hell of Auschwitz. Though Maximilian Kolbe was not a miracle worker in the spectacular sense of levitation or stigmata, his life was marked by extraordinary graces and supernatural strength that astonished those around him. One of the earliest signs was his vision of the two crowns in childhood, the white crown of purity and the red crown of martyrdom, which foreshadowed the exact path his life would take. That vision became his guiding star, a promise fulfilled decades later at Auschwitz. During his ministry at Niepokalanów, many friars and laypeople testified to his uncanny ability to inspire, to foresee dangers, and to protect his community through prayer. It was as though Mary herself guided his every step. When he founded the friary in Nagasaki, he deliberately chose a location on the far side of a hill. Years later, when the atomic bomb devastated the city, the friary was left almost untouched. Survivors attributed this to Kolbe's foresight and Mary's protection, a miracle of providence. But it was in the darkness of Auschwitz that the supernatural character of his life shone most brightly. Arrested by the Gestapo in February 1941, Maximilian was sent to the notorious concentration camp. Prisoners there remembered him not as a broken man, but as a source of unexplainable strength. Despite beatings, hunger, and humiliation, he radiated peace. Fellow prisoners recalled that he shared his meager rations with others, offered words of comfort, and even smiled through his pain. Some said that just being near him gave them courage to endure. In a place designed to crush hope, Kolbe became a quiet miracle, a living reminder that God hadn't abandoned them. Perhaps the most remarkable testimony came when he volunteered to die in place of another man. Condemned to the starvation bunker, Maximilian did not collapse into despair. Instead, he led the others in prayer and hymns. Witnesses reported hearing psalms and rosaries echoing from the underground cell, day after day, transforming a chamber of death into a chapel of hope. Normally, prisoners in the starvation bunker lost their minds within days, fighting each other for scraps. But under Kolbe's presence, the men remained calm, united, and prayerful. Guards who checked on them were unsettled. Some whispered that something supernatural was happening, that this priest had changed the very atmosphere of the bunker. After 2 weeks without food or water, only Maximilian remained alive, still praying, still conscious. Finally, the guards ended it with a lethal injection. Even then, he did not resist. He simply lifted his arm and offered his life, like Christ on the cross. For those who survived, this was no ordinary death. It was a miracle of grace, the triumph of light over darkness, love over hatred, heaven over hell. Maximilian Kolbe's life was filled not with sensational miracles, but with the greatest miracle of all, the miracle of love that chooses sacrifice over self, even in the face of death. By 1941, Poland was firmly under Nazi control. Maximilian Kolbe, who had already been arrested once and released, was arrested a second time on February 17, 1941. This time, there would be no return to Niepokalanów. He was first taken to Pawiak prison in Warsaw, where he endured harsh interrogations and brutal treatment. From there, in late May, he was deported to the dreaded concentration camp of Auschwitz. His prisoner number was For a man who had once overseen a bustling monastery of 700 friars, the barbed wire and brutality of Auschwitz were a stark descent into hell. The Nazis sought to strip every prisoner of dignity. Kolbe was beaten mercilessly, forced to carry heavy loads despite his weakened lungs, and mocked for his priesthood. Yet even here, he lived his vocation. Fellow prisoners remembered him as calm, gentle, and radiant with inner strength. He shared his bread, whispered prayers, and encouraged others not to give up hope. Then came the defining moment in July 1941. A prisoner escaped from Kolbe's block. As punishment, the camp commandant ordered that 10 men be chosen at random to die by starvation. The air was heavy with terror as names were called. One man, Franciszek Gajowniczek, cried out in anguish, "My wife! My children!" At that instant, Father Kolbe stepped forward. Breaking ranks, he removed his cap and in a calm, steady voice said, "I am a Catholic priest. I am old. I wish to take this man's place." The commandant, stunned, agreed. Gajowniczek was spared. Kolbe, along with 9 others, was led to the starvation bunker. What happened next became legendary. Instead of screams and madness, the underground cell was filled with prayer. Maximilian led the condemned men in rosaries and hymns, encouraging them to forgive, to trust in God, and to prepare for heaven. Guards who passed by were unsettled, some even moved. They said they had never seen anything like it. The bunker had become a chapel. Days passed. One by one, the men died. After 2 weeks, only Maximilian remained, astonishingly still alive, still praying. Weakened but serene, he continued to encourage the guards, offering his suffering in silence. Finally, on August 14, 1941, the eve of the Feast of the Assumption of Mary, the Nazis decided to end his life. A guard entered with a syringe of carbolic acid. Kolbe, too weak to stand, lifted his arm willingly, as if to say, "I am ready." He received the injection, whispered a final prayer, and slipped peacefully into eternity. His body was cremated the next day. No relics remain of him, only the fire of his witness, preserved forever in the memory of the Church. For his fellow prisoners, Maximilian's death was not a defeat, but a triumph. In a place built on hatred and despair, he proved that love was stronger. His sacrifice was a living echo of Christ's words. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Franciszek Gajowniczek, the man Kolbe saved, lived to be 93 years old. He never forgot the priest who took his place, and he spent the rest of his life telling the world about him. In the hell of Auschwitz, Maximilian Kolbe became a martyr of charity, a priest whose final act of love continues to shine, as one of the greatest testimonies of faith in modern times. The story of Maximilian Kolbe did not end in Auschwitz. In many ways, it was only the beginning. News of his extraordinary sacrifice spread quickly among survivors of the camp and across Poland. To a world devastated by war and violence, Kolbe's act of self-giving love stood as a beacon of hope. In 1971, just 30 years after his death, Pope Paul VI beatified him, honoring him as a confessor of the faith. But many argued that his sacrifice was more than that. It was true martyrdom. He had laid down his life in a direct imitation of Christ, offering himself out of love for another. That recognition came in 1982, when Pope John Paul II, himself a Pole who had lived through the Nazi occupation, canonized Maximilian Kolbe as a martyr of charity. In his homily, John Paul II declared, "Maximilian did not die, but gave his life for his brother." This was the victory won over all the systems of contempt and hatred in which the dignity of man was trampled upon. The canonization ceremony in St. Peter's Square was historic. Among those present was Franciszek Gajowniczek, the very man Kolbe had saved. Now an elderly man, he wept as he witnessed the church proclaim his rescuer a saint. It was a powerful symbol. The one who had received life stood beside the one who had given it. Today, devotion to Saint Maximilian Kolbe spans the globe. He is honored not only as the patron saint of prisoners, but also as the patron of journalists, families, and the pro-life movement. Fields where truth, sacrifice, and the defense of human dignity are urgently needed. His feast day is celebrated on August 14th, the eve of the Assumption, forever linking his sacrifice to the Virgin Mary, to whom he had consecrated his life. Shrines dedicated to him exist in Poland, Italy, Japan, and beyond. His image often depicts him in his Franciscan habit, sometimes with the 2 crowns of purity and martyrdom, or in the striped uniform of Auschwitz, reminding us of the cost of discipleship. For countless Catholics, Saint Maximilian Kolbe is more than a figure of history. He is a spiritual father and intercessor. People pray to him for courage in the face of persecution, for strength in suffering, and for the grace to live and love selflessly. From the ashes of Auschwitz, Kolbe's light has spread to the entire world, proving that even in the darkest of times, love has the final word. The legacy of Saint Maximilian Kolbe extends far beyond the walls of Auschwitz. His life and death continue to influence not only the Catholic Church, but also the broader world, touching millions of lives with his witness of sacrificial love. Within the Church, Kolbe is remembered as a prophet of modern evangelization. Long before the digital age, he recognized the power of media as a tool for spreading the gospel. His vision of using magazines, radio, and even film to proclaim Christ anticipated what the Church would later emphasize at Vatican II: the need to evangelize through modern means of communication. Many Catholic publishers and media ministries today trace inspiration back to his pioneering work at Niepokalanów. Kolbe's devotion to the Immaculata also reshaped Marian spirituality for generations. He taught that consecration to Mary was not a pious extra, but a powerful way to give oneself totally to Christ. Through Mary, he said, the world would be renewed. This teaching has inspired countless movements of Marian consecration, from lay groups to entire religious communities, who continue his mission of spreading devotion to the Virgin Mary. Beyond the Church, Kolbe's influence resonates in the realm of human rights and dignity. His act of substitution at Auschwitz became a symbol of resistance to systems of hatred and oppression. In a world scarred by genocide, war, and injustice, Kolbe stands as a reminder that even one act of love can defeat the logic of violence. His life has been studied not only by theologians, but also by historians, ethicists, and peace activists who see in him a model of moral courage. Kolbe's witness has also touched interfaith dialogue. Though he died as a Catholic priest, his willingness to save a married layman with children speaks across religious boundaries. Jews, Protestants, and even non-believers honor him as a man who lived out the universal value of self-sacrifice. In Auschwitz itself, his cell has become a place of pilgrimage, where people of every background come to reflect, pray, and be inspired. His influence even reaches popular culture. Films, novels, and documentaries have recounted his story, introducing new generations to his courage. In Poland, he is celebrated as a national hero, a son of the land who stood firm in the darkest chapter of the nation's history. Globally, he is remembered as a saint of the 20th century, whose relevance has only grown with time. In the end, Kolbe's influence is simple yet profound. He showed the world that true power is not found in domination, but in love, and that even one act of self-giving can echo across history. Why does the story of Saint Maximilian Kolbe still matter today? Because his life addresses some of the deepest wounds and longings of the modern world. We live in an era where self-preservation and individualism often dominate. Success is measured by power, wealth, and control. In contrast, Kolbe shows us that the greatest act of freedom is not self-preservation, but self-giving. His decision to step forward at Auschwitz was not forced, it was freely chosen. He reminds us that true greatness is found in love that costs everything. In a time marked by hatred, division, and violence, Kolbe's life offers a radical alternative. He did not respond to evil with anger or revenge, but with sacrifice. His witness tells us that love can disarm hatred, even in its most brutal forms. This message is desperately needed in a world still scarred by war, terrorism, and injustice. For families, Kolbe's story resonates deeply. He saved the life of a husband and father, ensuring that children would grow up with their parent. Today, when families are fractured and many fathers absent, his act underscores the sacredness of family bonds and the responsibility to protect them. For young people, his example speaks of courage in weakness. Kolbe was frail, often sick, and considered unsuitable by worldly standards. Yet he became a saint who changed history. His life proclaims that God can work powerfully through anyone who gives themselves completely, no matter their limitations. His message also applies to the Church's mission today. In a digital age, he would likely encourage Catholics to use every tool, social media, film, the internet, to proclaim Christ, just as he once used printing presses and radio. His creativity and evangelization challenges believers not to fear modern tools, but to sanctify them. Finally, Kolbe's spirituality of Marian consecration offers hope for a confused world. He taught that entrusting ourselves fully to Mary brings us closer to Jesus, guiding us in purity, humility, and courage. For people searching for direction, his devotion offers a path of clarity and peace. In short, Maximilian Kolbe is not just a saint of the past, he is a saint for our time. His life is a call to resist selfishness with sacrifice, to overcome hatred with love, and to live with the courage to give everything for Christ. Saint Maximilian Kolbe's life is a story of vision, courage, and ultimate sacrifice. From a small boy in Poland who dreamed of 2 crowns, to a Franciscan friar who used modern media to spread the gospel, to a prisoner who gave his life in Auschwitz, every step of his journey pointed toward one truth: love is stronger than death. He was not a soldier with weapons, but a priest with a rosary. He was not powerful in body, but mighty in spirit. And when the darkest hour came, he did not cling to life. He gave it away. In doing so, he became a living icon of Christ, who laid down his life for his friends. Today, we remember Saint Maximilian Kolbe, not only as a martyr of charity, but as a saint for our age. A man who showed that holiness is possible even in weakness. A missionary who proved that modern tools can serve the gospel. A witness who revealed that selfless love has the power to transform the world. Let us close with a prayer. Saint Maximilian Kolbe, faithful servant of Mary and fearless witness of Christ, you chose both crowns, the crown of purity and the crown of martyrdom. You gave your life freely so that another might live, reflecting the love of Jesus himself. Pray for us, that we may have the courage to resist hatred with love, selfishness with sacrifice, and fear with faith. Intercede for our families, our church, and our world, that we may live with hearts consecrated to the Immaculata and lives dedicated to Christ. May your example inspire us to give ourselves fully until we too can share in the eternal victory of love. Amen.